Kaylee, welcome to the channel. It's been 3 years, I think.
3 years, and the first time that we're doing this in person.
In person, right?
So Shaan is in Toronto, so welcome.
Yeah, I love Toronto. It's been great. Food's been awesome. You showed me around a lot of great spots. I want to get started with this podcast, and it's been 3 years since we've chatted. And I know a lot of things have changed, but I wanted to ask you first and foremost, how do you define recovery after going through these last, since we last talked, before that, after? What is recovery like to you? That's
a great question. And, I'm sure those of you who are listening, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but Shaan and I filmed the video 3 years ago. And, funny story how that all came to be. But essentially, I had gone through the worst bout of anxiety that, I've ever gone through. I was sensitized, as we like to call it in our model. And I had come out of it. And at the time, I didn't have anyone that I could really go to help me, because it was such for me at the time, YouTube didn't have much, right? YouTube, most people, there were all kinds of different people talking about, eating healthy or it being in the gut or doing these weird things to recover. And no one ever talked about being able to recover and keeping it simple. So early on in my own journey, I had stopped looking on YouTube, and I ended up reading Claire Weeks, as I talked about in the first video quite a bit, and ended up finding a therapist who had gone through anxiety, and that was where I ended up on my journey. So when I found you on YouTube, that was at the end of my journey. I was, we talk about recovery, I was at a stage where my symptoms were pretty much gone, but I was still kind of going through that last little bit. And when we think about recovery, and this is a big thing we talk about in our mentorship, right? Of this idea of what is recovery? 'Cause I think for a lot of you who are listening, or a lot of you who are in the thick of your anxiety right now, for you, recovery means I'm symptom free, right? I no longer have symptoms. I'm back to my pre-anxiety self. I'm normal, quote unquote, again. But that's not how I define recovery. And for Shaan, I think from what we've seen through our mentorship, through helping thousands of people through our own journeys, not how we would define recovery either. Because when I did that interview with you 3 years ago, I was not completely 100% symptom free, in the sense that there was still a bit more of my journey to go. There were times where symptoms did come back here and there, but I wasn't there yet. Whereas now, I am fully there. And that's important though, because at that time I would still say that I was recovered. And those that we work with, when they've hit that point in their journey, I would say that they're recovered as well too. So, just to define that for everyone, what I've seen and what I've experienced in my own journey is that recovery is not this light switch of, I now am symptom free and now I'm recovered. It is much more of a spectrum when it comes to how someone gets back to being, anxiety free. I think because a lot of people, when they fall into the cycle, and we see it all the time, is that it's almost one day they, have a bad trip on marijuana, or they have a panic attack, or they go through a surgery or a health scare. I know COVID was a big thing, getting COVID, and then all of a sudden now they're anxious all the time. Right? It almost seems like it's a switch. Okay, one day I'm normal, one day something happens, and then bam, now I have anxiety. So a lot of people think that, okay, when I recover, same way just happened one day, one day I'm gonna wake up and it's gonna be gone. And that's not what recovery is like. Recovery is much more gradual. And, we always talk to all of our mentees about this, but if you were to ask me when was the exact moment where I was completely symptom free, I couldn't give you a date. Yeah. Because it's such a gradual progression to being symptom free, if that's how you define recovery. And I don't know if you can agree with that as well too.
Yeah. So when I was going through the anxiety recovery journey, when I was stuck in it, my idea of recovery was symptoms being gone. And a big part of my recovery journey, and this is something we really focus on when people first join the mentorship, right, is redefining what mentorship is. And for us, for the person who's struggling, their symptoms are so in their face, they just care about eliminating it. And so it is kind of interesting, right? When like somebody who has overcome it telling them, hey, it's not the symptom that matters. It almost sounds a little bit condescending to them. I know I've really felt like that when I would go to doctors and they'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, I have this symptom. And I thought the doctor would be like, we got to get to the bottom of this. I've never seen something like this, right? And they're just like, I've never seen anything like this, but you're fine, you know? And so a big part of recovery, there's this quote I read, and I'm probably going to butcher it. It was like Abraham Lincoln is, if I had 8 hours to cut a tree, I would spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. And I think with recovery, it's a big portion in the beginning stage is just defining what recovery is. And letting go of this idea that recovery is your symptoms going away. I think everyone wants their symptoms to go away, and their symptoms do go away. But there's a big difference between your symptoms going away as a goal and your symptoms going away as a consequence. People try to directly make the symptoms go away. That doesn't work. You have to the symptoms go away indirectly by, first of all, learning what recovery is and recognizing that it's that resistance that's keeping the symptom alive. And I think a lot of people look at it very intuitively, which is like, oh, if the symptom is here, why does it matter how I react? Right? Like the symptom is here, right? It's like, oh, well, how is my reaction going to change? It's here right now. And instead of looking at recovery like as a linear way, I look at it more circularly, like cyclically, which is like, no. It's if you react through panic, through the 5 F's we talk about, fearing, fighting, fixing, getting frustrated, focusing, that reinforces it and makes the symptom come back later. And when you start looking at recovery that way, then I look at recovery as 2 different parts. There's the recovery of recognizing what you're doing that's keeping this alive and what to focus on. And then there's a second element of recovery, which is the symptoms going away. But the second element of recovery is irrelevant. That's going to happen on its own as long as you focus on the first aspect, right? And I think us as mentors in the mentorship and us as coaches in general, we're always focused on the first part, right? How many people have we done recovery stories with who are in the mentorship who are like, I'm doing so much better. This has been the best thing. But then if you ask them, do you still have symptoms? They're all going to say yes every single time, right? So it's really interesting how recovery is. And when somebody's in this constant state of anguish because of their anxiety, it's hard to look at this from like a very like rational perspective, because they're just like, I don't care about any of this. If this isn't helping me feel better, I don't want to hear it. But it's that constant seeking of feeling better, right?
Yeah, and I think this like just discomfort, right? Because anxiety is uncomfortable. It's one of the most uncomfortable things that I have ever gone through. Like, and you know, it's funny because I think people look at us because now that we are recovered and symptom free, people who are in the thick of it are like, how are they saying just like accept it or get over it? It's almost like, are they so insensitive? And it's like, no, we totally get it. We understand that it's so uncomfortable. And I think as human beings, just it's a natural thing is when we're uncomfortable or when we're feeling pain, right? If that's the word we want to use, we want it gone. Yeah. And we live in a society too where we're very like, you know, we're sick, we go to the doctor, we get a medication or an antibiotic or, you know, cough medication, whatever it is, we take it and we feel better, right? We have a headache, we take Tylenol, we feel better, right? We're very like, okay, we fix our problems. Yeah. And here's a problem now that you can't fix. There's no magic pill. Yeah. Right? It's hard work. And it's a lot of having to change habits and behaviors and mindsets, right? So redefining recovery, I think, is super, super important because we see it, right? Most people come into mentorship, they come in with this idea of, okay, how do I make this gone? Like Kaylee, Shaan, Caesar, Shiv, Mirka, make this gone. Heather, make this gone, right? And we're like, okay, we'll get there, but you're over here, right? Let's start with over here. Yeah. And that's why I always give, you know, the Bye Bye Panic, like your logo is a mountain. And I always give that analogy and the discussion around, you know, we're thinking about climbing a mountain, right? You know, us as coaches, as mentors, we're at the top. Like we're done. We made it up there, right? But everyone in our program, even in general, everyone on their journeys is at a different starting point. Yeah, they're different parts of the mountain, and if you're only focusing on, okay, there's Shaan up there, how do I get there? You're going to slip and mess up because your focus is on the wrong place, right? Rather than focusing on what's in front of you right now, your hands and your feet, and how can you, do the best that you can in that moment to get to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And, when we think about recovery, for me, the person that has mastered that and understood that, how to, focus on what's in front of them, they're going to get there. Like, I don't have to help them get there. Like, they know what to do. And recovery, or the top of the mountain, is just time now. It's just a time thing. Yeah. Right? But the person who's constantly making mistakes, where they're looking up or looking down or getting frustrated or getting upset, that's the person who I'm most concerned about. Yeah. And I think our model and what we do, we're helping those people learn these big mindset shifts, so that they can get to the top of the mountain. Yeah. Right? It's about the technique, strategies we use, rather than this like idea of like getting there. And I also think too, when we define recovery as something that is like, okay, I am now recovered, means I'm symptom free. The biggest thing I feel people coming into our program and who we're helping is that when they have that view of recovery as I'm now symptom free, whenever symptoms come back, which in recovery journey they do, right? Like, recovery is not a linear thing of when it comes to symptoms. Like, symptoms are gonna be up and down all throughout. And as I'll describe in a moment when I talk about my journey since that video, right? There were moments where symptoms did come back for periods of time in a part of the leveling out process. That's how recovery is. It's like a leveling out of getting back to like, I don't know, stability, or, baseline, we call it all the time, right? But yeah, like, when people use symptoms, they get frustrated because symptoms do come back. And as soon as it comes back, they're like, oh, well, what did I do wrong? Shaan, why is it back all of a sudden? Why is it so strong? What do I do? It's because they're using symptoms as a basis of recovery. Like, if I did that too, of course I'd be frustrated, because then I would think that every time symptoms came back that I was messing up. But that's not the case, right? Symptoms will come back even when you're doing everything correctly, and that's okay. So that's why focusing on, okay, it came back, or I'm having like a higher anxiety moment right now. What are the principles that I've learned from the program of recovery, right, to get through every one of those speed bumps? Right.
I think one of the things that really like bewildered me during my journey, which was like, why are the symptoms coming back so intensely? I think that was the biggest thing, which was like, okay, I understand people experience symptoms when they're stressed. Before I was stressed and I fell into this, I would experience like symptoms as well. But this was like really intense. And I think this is where we really focus on helping people like understand nervous system sensitization and, what happens with the nervous system, why their body creates such exaggerated responses. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm experiencing this intense level because of this. But the main focus of that, like what you were saying, it's just so you stop getting distracted by the symptoms. Okay, now that you know why this is happening, symptoms don't matter. Let's focus on the response. This is a question I've been like thinking about often, and I wanted to get your take on it. Going through the cycle, coming out of it, helping so many people like we have right now, do you feel like more and more people are falling into the cycle? Or do you feel like this is just becoming, people are just more aware of this problem right now?
That's a good question. I think it's a bit of both. I think definitely mental health and post-COVID and just in general is higher. And I say it because we always joke too, is like, we see people, right, who are not dealing with the levels of anxiety that we dealt with, or that our clients deal with, but levels of anxiety where, they're doing these bad habits that we see that are not good, and they don't realize it, right? But then I personally avoid saying anything, because as we know, right, unless people like understand it or at a certain point where they actually want to start changing or get help, it's kind of like they're like, huh, what are you talking about? Yeah. So I avoid it. So I definitely see higher levels of that in many people that I talk to. Yeah. I'm also a school teacher, so being in the school system as well too, I see a lot of youth more and more dealing with mental health, anxiety. But I also think thanks to YouTube and thanks to information being so much more available, that it is more well known. And it's crazy to think too, because like I mentioned, like when I first fell into the cycle, a Google search or a YouTube search wouldn't get me much that was helpful.
Yeah.
Right? I would end up on these scary forums
Yeah.
telling me that I was, I had all these different issues, or, medical websites, or YouTube was just, different crazy advice that wasn't what I needed. Right? And even like Clary's book, like that took me multiple books to find. Right? So, but now, like I said, like a few years later, once I had recovered and I searched it again, then I found you.
Yeah.
Right. And now that I'm in the sphere of it, because I'm, working with you and we're helping many people, I definitely follow a lot of other people as well, or it comes up more often on my feed. So I am seeing it more and more often. So I think people are more aware. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's more, I think it's both too. I think there's a level of awareness where people are starting to come out. I think one of the best things people can do is when they share, I think one of the best things people can do is when they share their own story. It kind of gives everyone else permission. I think everyone was suffering a little bit in silence. And also when you're struggling with anxiety, they tend to be in their own house. They don't tend to go out. But then there was another level, and I was thinking about this last year when I was traveling, which was, I think we're getting I would say we're not good at dealing with discomfort. And I think it's just because we are used to being so comfortable, and thanks to like science and all that. I mean, we have air conditioning. We don't have to starve. We can eat. There's not much uncertainty in a lot of things, right? If we want something, we can get it in the next day with Amazon. I think people's ability to deal with discomfort, I don't think they're taught that skill. And I think when it happens, they don't know how to emotionally regulate. And I think as time goes on and as people become, they move from poverty and they just deal with a more comfortable lifestyle, they're more likely to fall in because they don't know how to deal with discomfort. And so I think in that aspect, it's growing a lot. And I think more and more people are falling into the cycle. So I think it's a little bit of both. And I think when I think about anxiety recovery, sometimes like people ask me like, what's the one trait, one skill set? I would honestly say it's the ability to emotionally regulate. I don't think people who are able to emotionally regulate would fall into the cycle. I think they'll have stressors. I think they'll have problems, but I don't see their feelings, their sensations or anything like that becoming the problem. And I think the older, the more, we evolve and as time goes on, people are just not educated in it. So I actually look at anxiety recovery a little bit more as an education issue, right? Because we're just not taught. And you were talking about, you being in the school system. We get information, right? But we don't know the mechanics of the mind. We don't know how to process emotion. And so when that happens, I think it's just a perfect opportunity. Like put somebody who's averse to discomfort, take away their ability to emotionally regulate or not teach them. And then it's just a matter of when, really, not if. I think we were just in the front lines of it to a degree, falling in. But I mean, I think that's what makes anxiety recovery so awesome, right? Because you learn so much about yourself. It kind of becomes like this, almost like a spiritual thing for a lot of people, because they learn so much internally about how the mind works, how the body works. And then they learn how to emotionally regulate. And then once you know that, then you can do any challenge, right? You can do any stressor. I wanted to ask though, since the last time we chatted, how has stressors been in your life moving forward? Have you how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, no. So that's a really good question, because I think for a long time we have avoided saying how long recovery takes. And we didn't do it to be deceptive in any way, but we did it because we recognize that many people, when they hear it takes X amount of time, they freak out.
Yeah.
Right? Because they want to know that, okay, can I get better? Once again, like you were saying, like people want to feel better right away. It's instant gratification of like, how do I get better as soon as possible? Or if I'm experiencing a crappy emotion, how do I get rid of it? Like, okay, I'm bored, for example, and you scroll on TikTok, so I'm not so bored anymore. Like people can't sit in discomfort. Right. So we always avoided saying it, but like now I've become, I think, very open with all of our clients about how long recovery takes. And of course, it's still different. Like everyone's going to be on a different trajectory depending on many factors, like where they are, their ability to execute, life in general, right? But, for me, from start of my panic attack and falling into when I did that interview with you, that was what I think a year and a half of me. So I was able to go from a place of having symptoms 24/7 and very intense, like 9, 10 out of 10, and like dozens of symptoms, if not more, to a place when we did that interview where I was symptom free most days, most weeks, and symptoms maybe popping up here and there.
Could I ask, so that was a year and a half from your first panic attack to that interview. At what stage did you start pointing in the right direction? When you found clear weeks and you found, like, was that like 6 months in, 3 months in?
6 months, about 6 months in.
Okay,
6 to 8 months in was when I think 6 months was when I found clear weeks. And then like maybe 10 or 12 months in was when I found my therapist that I had at the time. And then, let me just think of, like, I think it was about a year and a half or 2 years since when I found you, right? And I think that's a really important thing. And I really, when I remember in our mentorship, like, when we talk to our clients, when I first told them how long it took, I was scared to do it because I'm like, oh no, I think I start, getting upset that it's like a long time or whatever it may be. But everyone was so grateful to hear that, wow, the journey actually takes time. Because I think most people, once again, they're on this time crunch of how do I recover as fast as possible? And understanding that recovery takes time allows you to change that mind frame of, okay, I think I get better in 6 months versus, okay, well, what do I do to get to a better place? Yeah. Right? So, with that being said, what I've seen from my own experience and from people that we work with, like what recovery looks like at a glance or at a big view, like a bird's eye view, we could kind of go on top of someone's recovery journey. It's like I said, like you start off with really intense symptoms 24/7, many symptoms, at least that's how I was pretty bad, to then, symptoms 24/7, but maybe not 10 out of 10, but a 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10. I mean, not a dozen, but half a dozen. And once again, not linear. It's not like I'm just going from like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. It's like every day is different. And that's kind of where I was going. And then when I met Shaan and we did my interview, I was at a place in my journey where I was symptom free, like I said, most days, most weeks. But I would still feel like little things pop up here and there. And then the stress part, like you asked, is a big part of it. Because once I got to a place where symptoms were no longer a daily thing or no longer a big issue, then I would notice that when I was stressed, I was a bit more sensitive, where a normal stressor pre-anxiety wouldn't do much for me. I would notice a symptom or two popping up here and there, or the stressor like affecting me a little bit more. Right. But I was like, whatever, like I've come this far. I know what to do. I kept going at it. And, as time passed, stressors, the degree of it affecting me would lessen and lessen and lessen and lessen. And then, but not, once again, not linearly. Sometimes I would have like, a really stressful event and I would feel a little bit stronger that one time. And then I just continue on my journey and go back down to where I was. And then it just got to a place where I am today, where, like I was telling you earlier, if I wasn't in the mentorship and we weren't helping people every day, I wouldn't even think about anxiety. Right? But I can't give you, like, even when you asked me, when was that video we filmed? Like, how long was that journey? I don't remember.
It's a haze.
A year and a half.
I don't know if it was a year, 2 years, 3 years.
It was something, right? It was around that time, but I don't remember exactly. And that's why, when we think of, like, if we think of defining recovery as this place where, okay, symptoms are gone. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Recovery is too gradual for us to base it off that definition of it, which is why it's so integral that we change that perspective to, okay, recovery equals being symptom free, to recovery equals my ability to respond, to live my life, to focus on the things that I need to do.
Yeah.
I know you have some good things in the works for everyone. But just to give a little tidbit, you give a really good analogy in that when I was reading it, around like a threshold, a stress threshold, right? So you think about this cup, for example, like, when we're anxious, our cup is full of I guess stress, you want to say, cortisol, whatever you want to call it, where, any little thing, like if I were to knock it, it's going to spill. But as we start to recover and we start responding in a way that's different, we're no longer adding more stress to our cup by fighting, fearing, fixing, focusing, resisting, freaking out, whatever you add 6F.
6F.
Freaking out, yeah, right? Right, that's pouring into your cup. That's adding more stress, right? But we're trying to take stress out. So that threshold, right? Like when I was 24/7, 10 out of 10, my cup was up here, right? When you met me, maybe I was like down here. Now I'm like, my cup's empty where I'm able to do whatever, right? But it's also important to note that, and this is a kind of a next step, higher order thing, that as human beings, stress is part of life, right? Like there are times still in my life where I get stress. Do I experience symptoms like I did when I was sensitized? No, I don't. But I do still exhibit everyday human feelings of stress. Like if I'm thinking too much, maybe at night I can't sleep, or it's hard for me to fall asleep, right? Or, I get tension in my neck, but that's just a part of it. So, since that video, that's what it looked like. It's just me kind of going through that last step of continuing to live my life and getting back to a place where my body fully, completely leveled out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like with, sometimes when we use the word recovery, it almost seems like this linear, like this singular event, right? And recovery really it's like layers of it, right? You mentioned stress, and I wanted to know so if I heard correctly, you were in a much better place, but since then you've still been experiencing stress, but your symptoms haven't flared up the same way. But what happens, I feel like, when people, if they look at anxiety recovery as like this like grand thing, which is like, oh, once I get better, like I'm going to be so much happier, right? But the human condition is such that once you get there, you want to move forward, right? What's your view on stress moving forward? How do you view stress, and how do you think most people view stress? Because we always talk about it. Stress is part of life. And in fact, I would say if you want to do bigger, more fun things, if you really want to live your life the way you want to, you're probably going to experience more stress than most people. But most people just don't do that because they want to avoid the stress. So they avoid. But somebody who really wants to live life on their terms, they might experience more. But how do you view stress?
That's a good question. And it's one that I spend a lot of time with our clients talking about and reframing it. Because, you ask a question like, how do people view stress? I think most people come into, and probably one of the reasons why they fell into the cycle of anxiety, is that they view stress as a bad thing, right? Stress is this evil, bad thing that needs to not be there. Same thing with negative emotions. Like I know just this week, it's a part of our program, right? Our clients get access to us. We answer their questions all the time. On our platform, so they can ask a question, we give a response. So I know I was responding to one of our clients recently, yesterday actually, and they were talking about emotions, right? That they were experiencing, sadness or whatever negative emotion was, and I think they were asking like, how do I reframe that? Like, should I, say something positive after it, right? Or which I personally call like fake positivity.
I agree.
And I always teach our clients, like, it's not about changing our emotions or changing our symptoms. That happens, right? But it's about changing our relationship with them and how we view them. Because the human condition, we get stressed. Life is stressful, right? So even like when our clients come in, they're like, oh no, I'm going through this crazy event. It's so stressful. I wish I wasn't going through it. It's like, no, I'm actually, I'm not saying it with bad intent, but I'm actually glad you're going through this, because if you're able to go through life and experience what life is, which has stress, obviously happy moments, but also stressful moments, right? Experience it while you're sensitized and be able to respond and overcome that, you are a much stronger person than if you were just like living in a bubble with no stress and nothing happening. So, you know, with our client on yesterday on our platform, I was emphasizing that once again, like this idea of it's not about changing it to positive things. It's about learning how to be okay with not being okay, right? Sadness, frustration, anger, stress in general. They are things that I feel, you feel, every human feels. If we weren't human, we wouldn't feel those things. Yeah. But, and I still have that. And you always say too, like, you've done so much since your anxiety journey, and you've probably been the most stressed since you've been your entire life, even before falling in, right? But it doesn't affect us the same way because we've changed that relationship. Yeah. And that's really important. It's really important.
There's this one thing I still struggle with, actually. It's not really anxiety related, but I think with the work that I do, and you know, I'm very problem solving oriented. I'm like, you know, if we have this one issue, okay, what can we do to fix it, right? And there's like this doer attitude. And I think it allowed me to create Bye Bye Panic, and it allowed me to do all this awesome stuff and just have the idea of, hey, let's help people, right? It's like, okay, what are their biggest problems? How can we address that? How can we create systems to help support and automate it where the human interaction's still there, but it can still take a larger group of people. But I'm always in this problem solving mode. And then sometimes some things come up where I can't problem solve it. And instead of accepting, hey, just let it be, I turn more problem solving. I'm like, okay, I got to get more creative, right? And then I'll do that for long enough, and I'll keep hitting a wall. And I keep feeling like every time I try to do it, it kind of morphs. This isn't internal. This isn't a symptom or anything. This is like external stuff. This is work stuff, right? This is like, you know, a whole bunch of other things behind the scenes. And it keeps changing. And there's this habit in me, which is like, okay, well, if it didn't work this way, well, good, I learned something. Maybe I can attack it this way. Maybe I can attack it this way. And then what happens is that it leads to, okay, I think this isn't a problem. I think it's my inability to accept the situation the way it is, and then pivoting rather than making it go my way. And I think there's like this element of people in general where I think there's like this problem solving ability that gets them really far. And I think internally I recognize that, hey, if I try to internally fix things, that'll create more problems. But when it's external things, and a lot of times the problem solving helps, right? There's so many things where like, okay, here's the problem. Well, let's try this. And it worked. It's that ability where if it doesn't, let go. And it's one of those skill sets that even sometimes I have a hard time dealing with, you know? Anxiety, I can do it. No problems with that. Symptoms and stuff, I have no issues. But sometimes it's like, if we have a certain thing and I'm just like, man, we just keep hitting this wall. And you've seen me frustrated, right? I feel like I've gotten knocked down a few times. But then like looking at that and just saying, okay, it is what it is. It's okay. Maybe we could just pivot altogether. It really is a lifelong process, I feel. Do you feel like I wanted to ask something, actually. I wanted to ask you a little bit more towards the spiritual element of all this. So you've been going through a recovery journey. A lot of people talk about anxiety becoming like this spiritual opportunity and stuff. How has it been like for you?
Yeah, it's been it's been my partner actually calls me earthy as a term for me, because I'm all like zen and like into all the spirituality stuff. But I think it just lends its way because of how empowered I was once I recovered, right? It was like I fell into the cycle. I had this horrible, quote unquote, horrible problem that was, to me at the time, unfixable because no one told me I could get better. And then I ended up discovering how to get better. And through my own self, like how I was able to understand how the mind works, how the body works, and change my habits and change my thoughts and how I interact with my emotions. And, once I devoured all the anxiety recovery stuff that we now teach to all of our clients, then it just lends its way to the next level, which is the spirituality stuff, right? This idea of, we are not our thoughts. And if we're not our thoughts, what are we? Well, we're the awareness of our thoughts. But what does that mean? And how do we tap into that? So, for me, I wouldn't say like I'm no like extreme, like extremely into spirituality, but I am finding myself like really into that whole piece of like meditation and mindfulness, and yoga, and just that connection between our thoughts and our awareness.
Yeah.
And how we're better able to, once again, like you said, like redefining and changing our relationship with stress and with emotions that comes from our thoughts.
Yeah.
Right? Because our thoughts are what we're interpreting of a situation or a feeling, right? So if we have a stressful time and we go, oh my God, I'm stressed, and we're thinking about it in a very negative way, that stress gets amplified, right? But if we have a stressful moment and then we view it as, okay, that's a part of life, that's how it is, I'll get through it, that stress stays at how it is, right? And still there, it's not gone, right? But it's not being amplified through my reaction and my response to it. Mm-hmm. So I would say like my spirituality really comes around that piece of my thinking and my thoughts and like meditation and mindfulness, which once again we always shied away from when it came to anxiety recovery. And once again, not with bad intention that we do this, but we did it because I think a lot of people, and I still agree with this, a lot of people, especially in the beginning when you're really sensitized and you're experiencing symptoms 10 out of 10, 24/7, you're not going to go into that. First of all, I don't think you can do it properly. Like, you can't meditate. I mean, you can, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And once again, like your intention is not going to be in the right place, because if you're experiencing symptoms that intensely, it's going to be hard for you to be able to meditate and practice in the way that you need to practice in order to get to a better place, right? The principles of it won't make sense until you get to a different part of your journey. So yeah. How about you? How does spirituality look like for you?
Yeah, you're right. We steered away from it because I thought it was going to be a distraction. I was like, listen, you just need to focus on getting better first. You can revisit this later. And I think in the channel, we were always focused on the beginning stages of recovery. And then I say if people want to know more, they can work with us. But now, we can only I can make only so much content over the same thing over and over again. So I am kind of talking a little bit more about it, and I'm noticing people are responding more. Anxiety recovery was the most, it was an incredibly spiritual experience for me. I don't talk about it because people kind of get into their whole narrative around it. They turn anxiety recovery into a story. And they almost have this story in mind of how they recovered. And, recovery is not about having a narrative, it's just focusing on the response and seeing how the story unfolds itself. But recovery for me was extremely, extremely spiritual, because one of the things I think it did for me was, and I'm seeing as time goes on, it's getting worse actually, which is, I become very sensitive to suffering in general. And I think that probably had a lot to do with my own suffering. I felt it. It was so bad. And it's almost the suffering that connected me with everybody. It was like, oh, well, suffering, pain is pain. Just because you don't experience, just because someone doesn't look like you, or if it's an animal or whatever it is, like suffering is suffering, pain is pain, and that stuff is real. And so what it did, it weirdly connected me to everybody, made it more larger than me. And so I think that was why I created Bye Bye Panic too, which was, I felt that I really did feel like I got a second chance at life when I recovered, because there was so many elements that I just got lucky. If any one of those things went off, I don't know what would have happened. I truly do not know if I would have came out. And then when I got out, I tried to focus on living the life that I kind of missed out on, right? So partying, going out. And it was a good distraction for a little bit. But then there was like this yearning in me. I'm like, yo, man, like you got better. Other people are going through this. You're not doing anything, And then I started realizing that I am a very purpose-oriented, not purpose, because then it makes it sound more serious than it is. But I think there's like, if I'm going to devote to something for the rest of my life, it should be meaningful to me. And so it led me to Bye Bye Panic. And so I think there's this element of coaching for me too, which is I know what they're going through. I can feel it, but it's also about like, okay, what can I do to get you out? And what can we do to like help even more people? I think the second element that was very spiritual for me was this idea that you are not your thoughts. I think that was the biggest thing. I don't think I'd ever realized that my thoughts weren't me. I was so identified. And I also recognized too, my body wasn't me either, because I was feeling symptoms, but my body was fine. So I'm like, wait, who's feeling the symptoms? Right? Okay, my thoughts aren't me. Then who am I? Who am I? Right? And then it's like, well, it's that awareness. So it's like, how can I experience that awareness? But who am I in this awareness, right? It's almost like I look at it as like you're the sky, but in my mind, I try to make myself as a cloud. I'm like, okay, I'm the sky, but where am I in the sky? Right? And so that's an internal process that I'm still going through, which is that you can't think your way into spirituality, right? And then I also learned, right, when you are not your thoughts, your mind is really designed for survival, right? And now you're going into higher level things, which the mind is useless in. It can point you in the right direction, but I don't think it can, you can't experience it through the mind. So that's an experience I'm still going through. And I feel like the work we do in itself is very spiritual for me.
No, I agree.
Right? One of the things that I learned, one of the things that I think we had to adjust, which was in the very beginning, I almost felt like it was my responsibility to get somebody to recover. Right? And I think us as coaches did that, where it was like, oh, okay, they just don't know what's happening. If we just show them what's happening, they'll do it. Why wouldn't anybody want to get better? Right? So if they're not getting it, we're probably doing it wrong. Let's just readjust. And then what would happen was we would get some people that would throw themselves back into the cycle, consciously or unconsciously. And I remember I used to get upset by that, because I remember thinking, I'm trying to get you better and you're messing this up. You're getting in your own way. And what I used to do is I used to feel resentful. And I used to say, well, you're doing this. Like I'm trying to help you. Why are you sabotaging this? You're ruining it for the both of us. And then I realized it had nothing to do with me. And that at the end of the day, you can't, recovery is always on the person, right? Our methodologies are our methodologies. Our way of doing things is our ways. We can show people, and no matter how much they're desiring to get better, not everyone's going to be willing to get better. And so that was another element of spirituality for me, which was letting go, not trying to fix everybody. You give it out there. You're here to serve. I'm here to help. But there will be some people that don't take it. And there'll be some people that resent you. I think that was also another thing too. That was really whoa. The fact that somebody can resent you for wanting to get, if you got better and you were showing people, it was somehow, to that person, it felt like it was an attack on them, which I never thought about things that way. So all of it has been a very spiritual journey, and it doesn't end with anxiety recovery. I feel like it's even more profound. It's even deeper now. I have a more of a yearning now than ever before about like, who am I? And yeah, and that sensitivity to suffering to me is a little bit, it's kind of getting a little out of control, to be honest with you.
Well, like I was saying, like I can see it and I can feel it in other people. I think because now, like you said, like we have a much bigger awareness of our thoughts and like who we are, and that awareness, that I'm much more grounded. And I think you would say you're much more grounded as well too. Yeah. And a part of that being grounded is that you do feel, right, other people suffering, and you do see it, and you want to help, right? Like I know that I said in that video, I think I'm never going to be a coach, or I don't plan on being a coach, something along those lines. And like, like here I am.
Wow.
Surprise.
I actually I do remember you not saying that, but at the time I didn't. That would have made me panic. I would have been like, wait, what? What do you mean you can't be a coach? I need you as a coach. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, that video, I don't think I was ever planning on, it was supposed to just be like a story, like a story of someone who hadn't gone through your program, to say, look, this works.
And for everybody that was listening, when the first video came out of me and Kaylee, we had met the day earlier.
Yep.
For like maybe 10 minutes or something like that. And the way I found Kaylee too was I had a free Facebook group, like just like giving out more content. And what happened was that I just saw this person answering a lot of people who were struggling, and gave really great answers. And I was like, whoa, this person's good. And it was during the pandemic, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I reach out? And I met you, and within minutes of meeting you, I was like, oh my God, like this girl's amazing. And then I was like, I want you to be a coach right away. But then I was like, hold up, like let's have her on the channel first. And so I was like, are you cool with sharing your story? And then yeah, it took off. I mean, people love you. Like it's amazing. Like it's really great.
Thank you. But honestly, it just comes from that same thing you mentioned, this desire to help other people.
Yeah.
Because it's like almost like we have this magic, I don't know, the magic pill that we say that doesn't exist. Like we have knowledge and experience of going through this and coming out, and being able to share that and help others. It is spiritual. It is powerful. It's impactful. And I also say too, and all of our clients that are in the program with us, when they hit that point where you found me on my journey, I tell them, I say, now it's your turn to go and give back, because not just for yourself or to help others, but it actually helps you in your journey.
Exactly.
Because you're just solidifying. Now it's like you're solidifying what you know and then applying it to other cases, which in turn helps you in your journey. And I think we've implemented some strategies in our program because we've tried to make it much more interactive and engaging for those we work with, because like we said, it's a very active process.
Yeah.
Like recovery is like, we can lead a horse to the water, but we can't get it to drink. So it's how do we help people, and how do we simplify the process of getting them to understand and solidify these concepts. And by doing that, therefore doing it in their own lives and actually acting on it and changing their habits and their behaviors. Because like you said, I remember when I first joined, like at the time it was much smaller. It was me, you, and Caesar.
Yeah.
And we still talk about all of our clients because we care about all of them so much. But because it was smaller, I think we were a lot more invested with every single person in regards to why aren't they getting better? Why are they messing up here? Why are they doing that? We are so, took it personally. Like you said, we took it personally when people weren't getting it, and we were, trying to hammer it in different ways. And that was a big frustration for us. Mm-hmm. And that's where all of the improvements now, with where we've gone with the mentorship, I think is really helpful, because we recognize that, we can say things in a million ways. Yeah. But for someone to recover, they actually have to put in the work. So how can we simplify our information so that it's really understandable, people get it and understand it, and then how do we get them to act on it?
Yeah.
And I think we're still working on it. Yeah. But we've done a lot of big stuff and have made that a lot easier for people.
Can you imagine back in the day how it was set up, and now, and like the platform that we're using, how much of a change it's been? But one thing has never changed, I feel, which is self-awareness is necessary. in the recovery journey, right? There's no substitute, there's no platform, there's no coach, there's nothing that can take over being just self-aware. And sometimes people feel like they can circumvent that, but self-awareness is necessary.
100%, right? And I think people really have to, and I always tell this to all of our clients, right, that, recovery is active.
Yeah.
It's not a passive thing, right? I think a lot of people, they watch your videos, right? They hop on all of our mentorship calls, listen to me, Shiv, Murka speak, right? And they get the information, which is cool. It's an important piece of it, but then it's the action piece. You have the information. Now, what are you going to do with it?
Exactly.
And that's hard.
It's hard because the thing about videos, as someone who makes them now, is that what I see is people watching videos, it gives them the impression that they're doing something. And I think that's like one of the most dangerous things, which is like, if you watch a video, okay, I'm doing something. You're not. Like, you're just watching. You're just, what is it? Like information junkie almost, right? With the term we used to use. There's everything you can learn. Everything we talk about, you can learn if you just throw yourself in that uncomfortable situation and you learn how to respond. All the answers come to on its own. You'll adjust everything, right? And that's one of the things I learned about the videos. But yeah, with self-awareness, because I think what self-awareness really does too is it makes them more honest with themselves, but also like what we talk about on our calls, which is it makes people ask the right question. Right? This kind of goes back to the very beginning of this conversation, which is like, what is recovery? Oh, my symptoms are gone. That's not necessarily, there's so much more to that. And it's not about the symptom going away, right? It's about asking the right question. What's even happening? What does recovery actually look like? And when you ask the right question, the answers show up on themselves, but so many people are focused on so many things, right? Like, oh, well, has anyone else experienced this? I'm like, whether the answer is yes or no, why does it matter, right? Or like, can you give me that singular tip? And it's like, with anxiety, it's not one thing, it's not that simple. And so it's kind of one of those things that, I feel like we've improved so much, but that self-awareness is necessary, and how resistant some people are actually.
I was going to say, I'm like, people, and we've been talking about this entire call, a common theme, this idea of not being able to feel discomfort, right? And this resistance to discomfort, that, in my opinion, I think is one of the biggest obstacles for people, is their inability to feel uncomfortable. And when they are feeling all these crappy emotions, like you said, emotional regulation, they're unable to regulate that. Yeah. It just takes them, and they can't lose their grip of that. Mm-hmm. And it has to be like, once again, like changing that relationship, right? Like symptoms going away, it will happen. Feeling better, it will happen, right? Like these things will all happen, but not until you change how you view them. Yeah. But yeah.
It's and one of the things I always saw was sometimes when like you're focusing on recovery, you have to let go of certain identities, and letting go of an identity is really scary, because it's almost better to be identified with something than to be questioned it. And then what happens is that when someone's going on the recovery journey and they have to let go of the identity, for example, I'm just an anxious person, or even just accepting the fact that I'm doing this to myself.
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. And what happens when that identity comes up? Well, I'm no longer the victim if I'm doing this to myself. And then what's the natural response? It's anger, right? Why? Because you want to protect that identity, right? The ego wants to protect that identity, right? It feels good to be the victim. It does. That's one of the biggest things I learned from people. It's just people actually like, consciously or unconsciously, I think most of the time it's unconscious, but they do like feeling the victim. It feels good. And so when you are pushing people to recovery, it's not just about the symptoms, but it's about the discomfort of identity like release. It's like, wait, I'm not this. I just picked this up. And you can see people kind of like latch back on.
Yep.
Right? Like if somebody just gets angry or upset, you know, if they say, you know, that you're doing this to yourself. And the truth is, for everyone listening, there's an element of that is true and there's an element that's not, right? Because yes, this is happening by you, but it's also happening to you because you don't know what's happening, right? And so once you understand the mechanics, you'll see what's happening. So that answer is a little bit nuanced. But I also notice when people are getting better, there's this identity element too that plays a factor in recovery. I wanted to get your take on that, like seeing people directly, because you're in the front lines of it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think along with identity, as you're talking, the word accountability came up for me as well too, right? This idea of taking accountability for your behaviors and for your actions. Because like you said, like, and this is where we don't want to take that away from anyone, is that once you've hit this threshold of you being sensitized, right? It's happening to you in a way. Like your body's at this place, and whether you like it or not, you're going to be experiencing XYZ symptom, or as we call it under the anxiety umbrella, like symptoms, emotions, feelings, and DPDR, right? One or more or all. Right? So at that point, we get most of our clients is that they're at that point where now they're at the state where it's all happening to them and they feel almost out of control. Right? And it becomes identity. So, oh no, I'm this person, right? This is who I am. And that's a big thing for me as a coach, is getting people out of that mindset. And it's hard, right? Because if they've adopted that, it's hard to kind of change that frame. But I find recovery, at least my work as a coach, is a lot of times I'm not trying to like change individual behaviors all the time. Like, yes, I am working on that. But it's how am I changing your bigger mindset and understanding of how this works, of what recovery is. Because I think when I'm able to change mindsets, I'm able to hit more behaviors than just one at a time. So yeah, like it's tough, but when I see self-sabotaging, it comes from that piece of identity and also accountability. People don't take accountability for where they have control within their current situation. Because there is that piece there. There is that element of where you still have control, and it's hard. Because, you know, I always say, this is why I like, you know, in the group of all the coaches, I'm kind of known as the scientific one. But why I like focusing on the science is because for me personally, when it comes to recovery, once someone's able to understand the science and what is happening to them on a physiological standpoint, they're getting back control.
Yes. Because
they're understanding now, okay, here's what's happening to me. Here's what was out of my control, but here's what's in my control. And then as well too, I find like a lot of people, when they're just watching your videos, like, okay, Shaan says I have to do this, right? So I'm going to do this because Shaan said that I will recover when I do this. But when you think about that, why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because they're still trying to recover. They're making recovery that goal. So all they're doing when they're doing that is they're doing this thing that Shaan said to do, but they're doing it with the intention to get better. And internally, we know that from a neuroscience and perspective, that when you're doing that with that intention, you're still reinforcing the anxiety. You're still filling your cup of stress because you're telling your body, oh no, something is wrong. I need to fix this problem. And it's still going to be filling your cup full of anxiety, right? So for me, having our clients really understand the mechanics and the science behind what is happening, it gives a purpose or a rationale or reason for why they're doing what they're doing. And the bigger mindset pieces as well also help with that, because then it all kind of comes together and people are better to implement what it is that they have to do to get better. And I find like that helps with the identity piece. Like it helps them to understand that, oh no, like this is just a physiological response happening in my body, right? This is not me. This is physiology. This is me. This is what happened with the connection between the environment and my mind and my body.
Yeah.
And how that come together to get you where you're at.
And that brings up, I think, the biggest point out of all of this, which is, I think when we grew up, we looked at mind and body as this like total split, right? And so science looked at body, psychology looked at mind, neuroscience looked at brain. And then one thing that I love about you, and I think all the members love, is that because you're scientific, everyone's so hyper logical when they're like in the anxiety state, their mind is running, they're trying to think through everything. So when you bring up the science, you're more relatable because they're thinking through that way too, right? So like if you can come from a scientific approach, you're meeting them closer to where they're at, right? Imagine talking about anxiety through like an energetic level from someone who's like overthinking things. They're going to be like, what is he talking about? What's this energy like stuff? Never mind. But if you bring up the scientific, okay, that makes sense, you know? Because they're like in like this like mindset of like just the studious, what's going on? I need to figure out, you know? But I think one of the biggest shifts, and I think one of the reasons why we created Bye Bye Panic, at least one of the reasons why I created it, was I was a little bit disappointed in how we looked at health and wellness and how there's this split between like physical stuff, mental stuff, and even spiritual stuff, when really it's all the same thing, and how almost recovery kind of needs a little bit of elements of all of it, right? Even if someone's not like religious or spiritual, there are elements of kind of discovering like this self-awareness, mindfulness, this element that you are not you're not like the physical components, whatever that means. But it's almost like it's like the synergy around it rather than like this fragmentation of it. And I think the fragmentation, like, you know, there's nothing physically wrong with you. Okay, it's anxiety, when really it's mind and body, right? It's survival. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard to treat people, because I think we're just looking at it incorrect. I think looking at from a medical model, it was really good when we were looking at infectious disease. The way we have it is perfect. Like, it made a lot of sense. We made a lot of, we took like leaps and bounds when it comes to infectious disease, when it comes to antibiotics, how to treat certain things. But then when we're going to more chronic illnesses, but also like issues with anxiety, it's not enough. It's too fragmented. But I want to get your thoughts on that too. That's obviously my thoughts. But,
yeah, no, I agree 100%, right? Yeah. And I think, you know, back to your question earlier of like how it lends itself to spirituality is because that very thing. It's like it's together, right? We can't think of, you know, our health without thinking about our mind.
Yeah.
And going through the anxiety cycle, once again, just solidified to me how much our mind and our body is connected. Because like you said, you know, here I am experiencing all these horrible feelings and sensations and symptoms, but nothing is wrong with me.
Yeah.
So where's that coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that was just like, when you think about it, it's like, wow, like my brain and my mind has the ability to do that, right? And or just the connection between me constantly stressing in a way where I'm experiencing stress and then adding that extra layer of thinking and negativity to it.
Yeah.
How my brain interprets that and therefore interacts with my body and then produces symptoms.
Yeah.
Like, that was like mind blowing to me.
Right.
Because once, like you, prior to anxiety, I would go around la-di-da, thinking about whatever, worrying about this, worrying about that. Like, you know, I had no understanding of that piece.
Yeah.
And recovery and anxiety did that for me. And now that we are coaching, we're teaching our clients that and getting them to understand that as well too, because that's, once again, key to recovery.
Yeah.
Right? Understand that connection so you're able to get to recovery. So it's big. So of course, like I can't separate them. Like, you have to understand all three and work on all three to get to that place.
Yeah.
And and then that's why I think the science is really important, because you can still tie in the science of spirituality to how that connects to what it is that we're doing.
Yeah.
Right, which is how we teach it. And the science piece as well too. I think you were telling me how one of our clients was saying that how I'm very surgical with my answers is because I'm always, like, for me, once again, like, knowing the science piece of it. When you tell me, like, hey, Kaylee, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, right? What am I doing wrong? Right? I go back, I'm like, okay, based on the science, what does that do?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so that does that, and you're doing this, why is that happening?
Yeah.
And you can connect all the pieces to understand, like, what it is that you're doing. Right? Once again, accountability, right? This is happening to you, but you have a role to play, right? But what it is that you're doing to keep it alive. And how can we get you to be aware of that?
Yeah. And
can we get you, so now if you're aware of what you're doing wrong, now how do you put in what you need to do to change that and do what's right to get to recovery? Yeah. And that involves mind, right? It involves you really having to understand how your thoughts work and how they play a role with your body, right? Because we talk about some from a standpoint of like wellness, our bodies aren't machines. We can't work our bodies into the ground and be okay. Like when we are sick, when we don't get enough sleep, when we over exercise or really physically active, our body needs rest and recovery, right? And someone who's not sensitized, they'll feel sore, they'll feel tired. But for someone who is sensitized, you're going to feel your anxiety symptoms increase by tenfold, right? Because you're feeling the effects of physical stress on your body, but now through a lens of being sensitized, where you're feeling everything 10 times more. Yeah. Like I always say, it's like whatever you felt pre-anxiety, take a magnifying glass to it, and that's how you're feeling it now. Yeah. Right. So you have to understand the body and how your body works. So mind, body, and then spirituality just kind of pushes its way into there, because that's the next piece of it. Yeah,
I look at it as like once you understand the science, the mind will help you get to recovery to a degree, but then there's going to be a point where you outgrow the mind.
Yep.
Too, right? Like the mind helps you, and then like there's going to be a point where you're like the mind has its own limitations too. Now it's like, okay, well, what's beyond? And I think that's where spirituality kind of comes in. One of the things I was thinking about was we talked about how mental health is becoming more mainstream. People are talking about it more. And society is progressing its own way. Do you feel like there's any part of this that you feel like society is getting wrong? We're talking, it's more aware, but in terms of treatment, in terms of viewing it, is there any part of society that you feel like it might be going the wrong direction, or it's not hitting the mark based on what we've seen, objectively helping people get better? Do you feel like there's still a lot of misinformation, or if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I personally, I think, and this is from my own experience as well too, because even in my own journey of trying to find the correct information, it was tough. So I think there's a lot more information out there, but the problem with having more information is that it's not all good quality information. Mm-hmm. So, Google is great at pulling up, the most important search, but the most important search that it pulls up for you may not be the most relevant or the most meaningful for you. So we're almost like information overdrive, which is a lot going on, and it's hard to sift through and find what is correct. So while mental health is out there, like we see it on TikTok, on Instagram, on Google, the information is not always the best quality. Yeah. So it's, finding the right information. And I'm still seeing people out there, when I come across it, just saying stuff that's just not true or inaccurate, or trying to sell their approach, often has to do with like a product or, their coaching that has to do with their whatever it is that they're trying to sell, or their ideology. I also think that, once again, like anxiety as a term is too broad. It's too broad. And when people think of anxiety, And I was even looking at our video in preparation for this as well too, our first videos.
Yeah.
I was just going back on it and I was looking at some of the comments. Like one of the most recent comments is someone saying on there, you know, I'm experiencing the dizziness that you mentioned in the video, but I have it 24/7. That can't be anxiety. Right?
Yeah.
And that's a very common thing that we hear, that we see with people who come into our programs, that they don't understand that, yes, anxiety can be 24/7, right? Because we think of anxiety from like a definition in a textbook or on Google, right? This idea of, okay, it's situational. Anxiety comes when I am stressed, and then it goes away when I'm no longer stressed. Or people who get stressed over things that shouldn't be that extreme, like people who have like flying anxiety and they get really anxious about flying, or presentation anxiety.
Yeah.
But the anxiety is still linked to oftentimes situational, and it becomes out of control in those situations. But I almost believe that what we're dealing with should be almost like a medical thing, issue on their own. It's when our body hits that threshold of being, as we call it, and Clarice calls it. Is it Clarice that says sensitized? I think it's her.
Yeah, she says sensitized.
Yeah. Or we say, like, you know, in the cycle. But, you know, to be sensitized where our body is now in this almost like perma anxiety state, that in itself is like a whole different condition, I guess you would say. But I think people who haven't gone through it, doctors and therapists included, they treat it from like a more situational anxiety standpoint versus okay, now I'm sensitized, what's happening to them.
Yeah.
And that's big.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think one of the things is that I think the awareness of this stuff is important. I think it's going in the right direction there. More people are talking about it. Where I'm getting a little bit concerned is I am seeing people becoming identified with it. I can't do this because of my OCD. I can't do this because I struggle with depression or anxiety, or I have anxiety, so I can't do it. That to me is a little bit worrisome, because I think, put aside to the fact that there'll be people that use that to their advantage, you know, they won't do it with, like, you know, some people will always use it as a, you know, it's like pretending to get sick, right? They'll use it. It won't be genuine. It'll be a little disingenuous. Pushing that aside, I think that awareness is good, but how I'm seeing how people are responding to this idea of, we always talk about mental health awareness, and I say, why stop there? Why just awareness? Let's fix it, right? When it comes to how we approach fixing it, I don't see that changing. I could see that getting a little bit worse. I see when you're aware of it, cool, but then when you if the only thing that's provided is coping solutions and, oh, okay, you have this, okay, you're fragile, you know, back off a little bit, which, I mean, to a certain degree, which is good. I mean, if somebody's not, like, if somebody, you know, if you're sensitized, you're not going to be at 100%. So it's good to have that empathy. But if you take that too far, and if you validate that identity, we know a lot about identity from helping people. They'll try to protect it. And then what you're doing is that you're treating them that way, and that's keeping them in the cycle. So I think there's an element there needs to be what I'm going to see. I think the next evolution is going to be, the first evolution is awareness, but not really solutions focused, which I think is like kind of the phase we're getting into right now. And then it's going to be, okay, there's an awareness, but now it's focusing on solution. I think we're ahead of it all, right? Bye bye panic. I think we're already there. That's where I see a bigger concern, where I see a lot of people talking about, oh, well, I have anxiety, so I can't do this, right? Or I have this. And, you know, even 20 years ago, or even our parents, they'd be like, that doesn't exist. That's in your mind, you know? At least now it's like, hey, yeah, that's a real thing. A lot of people go through it. It's really debilitating. But I don't see as like focusing on the solution.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You know, as you're talking, like, I definitely agree with that. Mm-hmm. And I think it becomes almost like as a society or as a culture, we're a bit sensitive because we don't want to offend anyone. So, we want to make sure we validate everyone, which is awesome because people are now seen. But then also at the same time, it's just, so having anxiety is fine, or having depression is fine, and it's good to talk about it and make it aware. But there's also like ways to get help and find solutions. So, and not making it any, like you said, right? And how do we tap into people's potential and agency to make that change? And I agree. I think we do a great job at that because we're solutions focused. Is empowering people once again through understanding the science, and then for understanding how to get better and empowering them to act on that power. But yeah, I agree. It's a challenge.
Yeah. So I always think about it. I'm like, is the future going to be more? Where's our place in the future? And how I'm predicting it is that there's more people that are going to fall into the cycle naturally. I see more people talking about recovery from a surface level through an Instagram post or maybe a quick course or something like that. I see it maybe going that direction. But I think overall, it's going to be a little bit more of an identity. People are going to be identified with it, and they're going to try to protect it.
I also see making excuses.
Yeah, exactly.
And we see that in mentorship quite a bit, where people come in, they're like, well, I can't do this because I have anxiety, or I can't do this because it feels so bad, or, whatever it is. And for us, it's no, you can feel like that and you can still push yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I even extrapolated to everything that's going on in the world, right? Like, I'm in America right now. It's like a little bit polarized. A lot of it is because, people get offended really quickly. And once they get offended, they lash out, right? And how much do we learn about anxiety recovery is you could feel offended, but you don't have to react in offensiveness. And so what I see the reaction being is, well, I'm just going to do nothing to offend you then, right? And I'm just going to walk on eggshells. And I look at the same thing with anxiety. Oh, you're feeling anxiety? I'm not going to do anything to cause you even the slightest amount of discomfort. So I see it going more and more extreme that direction. But we know this. It doesn't do anything except it makes the person more and more sensitive to discomfort, right? It lowers their threshold. So in that aspect, like I say, I'm not seeing things change. And then there's some groups of people that are like, well, I don't care what happens. I'm just going to say whatever I want. I don't care what backlash I get. But I think so much of it is going to be on society as a whole, learning how to emotionally regulate.
Yeah.
And realizing there's a difference between feeling the offense and getting offended and lashing out, right? There's two different things. And that's why I really do feel anxiety deep down is just an education problem. I really do feel it's like if people just understood what forces were at play, and it's so hard to teach them those things once they're in the cycle. And I think, if we would have just taught this early on in school, younger, they wouldn't be just set up so well with anxiety recovery and not falling into the cycle, but they'd be just so empowered in other aspects of their life. And I sometimes kind of think, I'm like, is this by design?
Right.
Is this kind of part of the, culture and society that we live in? Well, if you don't have any agency in that element, it's easier to manipulate you. Right. And so these are kind of like the thought patterns I'm kind of naturally going into when I was just that kid that was just trying to get his symptoms to go away. And then once that goes away, it's like, okay, well, how do we get other people better? Okay, cool. What's going on in society as a whole? That's what forces are in society in general. And it's just such a fascinating thing to observe. And it's almost like looking into the Matrix a little bit. Oh, it is.
It is. Right? And I find that I'm overanalyzing everything.
Yeah.
Even when you're talking about what factors are at play in society, or is it by design? I think of technology, for example. Yeah. We know now that TikTok, for example, kids are on there aimlessly scrolling. And I remember I was listening to a podcast where they were saying even the tech giants in Silicon Valley, they don't let their kids use technology. I think Steve Jobs didn't let his kid use an iPad. So it's what are they, like, what is the purpose behind certain things? So it's like, think about social media, for example, or like using Instagram, TikTok, and scrolling on it. How is that impacting your mental health and your ability to be sensitive, right, or regulate your emotions? I think it's part and parcel of a larger problem, and kind of what are the intentions behind it.
It's never that, right? It's never like social media is bad, this thing is bad, right? Like using supplements is bad, you know, breathing techniques is bad. It's always based on the individual, what's the intention and how it's being used, right? And yeah, I agree. Like with social media, right? There's this dopamine spike you get when you're on these platforms. And I even can feel it too. I can feel that pull of like, I'm not on my phone for like even a couple hours. I'm like, hey man, like what's going on Instagram? And when you have that dopamine spike constantly and you pull that away for a little bit, now you're feeling discomfort. And people can't sit with the discomfort. So what do they need? Another dopamine spike. I need to get back. I need to get back. And then it becomes like this addiction, right? And I look at anxiety as very much of addiction to the discomfort, you know, which is very hard for someone that's in the cycle. They probably won't be able to comprehend because they're like, this feeling sucks. I don't want it. But addiction doesn't mean that it feels good per se. I think addiction is just, this is known. This is comfortable. You can feel comfortable and miserable at the same time. There's a lot of people that are, you know, miserable and they're comfortable in that. It's actually letting go of that. How many times do we hear, oh, you know, I'm not feeling anxiety anymore, and that makes me anxious. It's like, well, you're not used to not feeling anxiety, right? And so it's just so interesting, and there's so many different aspects of it, I think.
No, it's very, very, it can be difficult, right? And I think, you know, when we talk about this idea of becoming more aware, it's that very thing. It's like, it is difficult. So how do we simplify that for people, and how do we get them doing the right things? And that's where I think we do, you know, I'm biased, but I think we do a really good job at that, because we've not only have me and you and our entire team gone through it, not only now have we been helping people for over 3+ years, you longer. I can't believe 3 years. That sounds so
it feels
crazy.
Yeah. And so much has changed in the 3 years. I was literally thinking when you first started, and I think I just made the modules. Probably just started. I don't even think we were doing group at the time. I mean, I think we just started. Group.
When I came on, we just started. But you, before that, you were doing one-on-ones.
Oh my God, it was rough. Yeah. It was so much easier doing group. Not in the sense that like it was easier for me. We got better results from group.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. I'm like, you know, I think a lot of people, we have this idea that you need like individualized support. But what have we seen?
Yeah, we've seen actually. So the idea of individualized support is good. I think that's fine, and that's important. But the problem with there's a difference between individualized support and one-on-one access. I think there's a difference there. I think a lot of people want that one-on-one because they assume that's the individualized approach. And I get that because that's what they're used to seeing. But there's a big critical element of anxiety recovery that I think the therapy model, the medical model has not been able to fix, which is this feeling of uniqueness and this feeling that this hyper alone, you know, feeling that they have. And a big part of recovery is normalization. You know, it's recognizing that, hey, this is discomfort, like this is uncomfortable, but if you just saw other people going through this and coming out, it would normalize it and it wouldn't make all these things such a big deal. And so one of the core pillars of, you know, the recovering program is the group coaching, right? And naturally people come in and they're naturally uncomfortable about that. It is very vulnerable, right? Sharing that kind of stuff. I would feel it too. I would feel that same vulnerability. I don't want to share my stuff. But that's where we talk about recovery isn't about what you want to do. It's about what's the right thing to do. And putting yourself into, it's that quote that I heard that I think is so true. It's like your outcome depends on your 5 closest friends around you. That's one of the best predictors. And so if you're around people that are recovering, that are actively getting better, that will inspire you and keep you going. And so what we find in group is, number one, the questions you have, I can promise you, you will not ask that question. Someone else will.
Yeah.
And so knowing that someone else is going through the same thing normalizes it. So not only do we answer one person's question, we answer like 8 people's questions on that call, just that one question. So it normalizes that aspect. Number 2, you see people getting better. Number 3, it's not just with anxiety recovery, it's very hard to self-reflect and see your flaws. How easy is it to see your flaws in like your partner, your family member, your friend, and be like, man, this person just keeps making the same mistake over and over again. It's so easy.
As coaches,
right? And so it's really easy to see other people. It's very hard to reflect. But I always look at it as like, when you go into like those carnivals and stuff, those mirrors that are like distorted. One makes you look super short, one makes you look super tall. That's like how it is looking at yourself. You won't get a true accurate depiction because there's a lot of identities involved. There's ego involved. There's all these different like patterns that are skewing you, but it's a little bit easier to see it in other people. Unless like you're super infatuated with the person or you like really despise the person. If you're just pretty neutral, you can see very clearly where people are going wrong. And one of the great things about group is you can see where people are messing up. Then the natural consequence is, well, if they're doing that, where am I doing that? You're a fool to think, oh, they're going through that, I'm not going through it. That's a foolish thing. I guarantee you, if you see other people going through it, I almost guarantee there's elements of you that are like that. And so one of the things that group does is that it helps you self-reflect and helps you become that guide. And from my perspective, not only is it it's probably the secret sauce of our recovery, like helping people in recovery, but it also is a good indicator for me. It's like, okay, you say you want to get better. You saying you're willing to feel a little bit discomfort, even if it's good for you. I want to see it. Okay, come on these calls, participate, engage, listen to what the mentors are saying and execute. I want to see. Right. And so for me, it's also like a small element of like, okay, you saying you want recovery. I want to see it. Is this just a desire or are you truly willing to get better? But then 1 or 2 calls and then they're obsessed with it, right? How many people come on our calls just to listen? How many people listen to the replays? Like how many people just want to stay in the community even though they're better, right? People are like, hey, listen, I just like it. I'm feeling better, but is there a way I can just like listen in? I like it, right?
And I think all of our clients become like a family. Like literally everyone is rooting each other on. Yeah. And we all become invested in each other's journeys. Yeah. Right. And like I always tell our clients that, I didn't have the group, right? I wish I did. I had my therapist, but throughout my entire recovery, I always had that feeling of I am alone. Yeah. Is this only me? Am I actually going to recover? Right. Which obviously I think everyone with anxiety has those thoughts and we have to address how we respond to those thoughts. But definitely mine was stronger because I didn't have people alongside me who were going through what I was going through and seeing that firsthand. It's like I always tell our clients like how lucky they are to have that. And, we talk about timelines. Like I know that if I had that, my timeline would have looked a lot different. Yeah. When it comes to recovery.
I would have gotten less distracted.
Yeah, it would have been less being thrown off.
What about this? What about that? No, just stick with this, Yeah. That would have just simplified things. There was so much mental effort trying to figure things out. So much unnecessary stuff that if just like, and for people that are listening that are like, I still want to do it on my own, that's totally fine. I just look at it as, there's 2 ways of going about recovery. It's you can have a guide that has had every mistake you've made, they have made or they've seen, and they have almost like a bank of mistakes to avoid so that they can streamline it, or you make those mistakes yourself.
Well, like you were saying, and I want to touch on that as well too, where it's really hard for you to see what mistakes that you're making, right? Because if you haven't walked that path before, how do you know what where the mistakes are.
How could you know? That's the thing, right? How could you know? You've never done this before. Like, you know, like how are you supposed to know to avoid that? How are you supposed to know once you're at this stage, this is what matters? Like, you can't know that.
It's a lot of trial and error, right? So, you know, it does, right? Obviously, if you have more speed bumps on the road, you're going to get slowed down a little bit more. You're still going to make it to your destination.
Yeah.
That's inevitable, but it's those speed bumps.
Yeah.
Right? And we're doing our best to get rid of those. And I think the group aspect does a great job of getting rid of, like, bulldozing a bunch of them.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I look at it as just collapsing time. Right? Like, I knew I wasn't going to live like 1,000 years. So it's like, do I want to spend most of my life trying to figure this out? I want to live, right? I always said the prize wasn't recovery. The prize was life, right? It was going back and doing the stuff we're doing right now, right? And so for me, it was just a matter of, you know, everyone chooses their own adventure at the end of the day, right? Everyone, it's an adventure and you make the choice. I wanted to ask you one question though. I wanted to ask, what is your vision for Bye Bye Panic in the future? Where would you like to see things go? What do you feel like, you know, as the world is evolving? This was 3 years. Imagine what's going to be in the next 3.
Yeah, no.
Like, what do you see? What would you like to go?
So I'll answer, then I'll throw it back to you since you are the
the
boss. For me, access, I think, is big, right? I think I want as many people as possible to get better, right? Back to this idea of how do we help people, right? And I think access is a big part of that. So helping as many people as we can. That's one part of it. And then 2, once again, back to like, how do we expand our reach of helping people, is making this knowledge more accessible. Mm-hmm. And that can look many different ways. I think obviously YouTube is one element, but I'm thinking bigger than that, mm-hmm. whether it be books, mm-hmm. whether it be actually going into academia and going into, you know, psychology departments and saying, no, here's this and here's what you have to do and here's how it looks like. Or even in medicine, like having, you know, we call them family doctor. I think they're GPs mm-hmm. for you guys. Like having them know when someone comes into my office and they have these symptoms, how to direct them to the right resources, right? And I think too, like, you know, one thing with access, therapy in general, or just like support with mental health, is very hard to come by. Mm-hmm. And it's very expensive. Like, I don't know how it is in the US, but, you know, we have universal health care here, but mental health is not covered under that. Mm-hmm. So if someone is looking for mental health support, it is very expensive. Yeah. And if you want like subsidized support or free support, which we do have, as you can imagine, it is packed full of people. Right? It's very hard to get that. So, you know, if someone is struggling, how are we able to get them support that's accessible for them? Yeah. Right? It's not having to have a wait list or cost them an arm and a leg, right? And it's not effective. And then I think lastly, the teacher in me, and like we've mentioned already, is, you know, how do we get this into schools, right? How do we make mental health a part of the curriculum from a young age? So students are recognizing the importance of well-being, right? And their thoughts and how to manage their emotions, regulate their emotions. Because, you know, the academics are one part of school, but as we all know, like if we're not in a good mental place, academics are not going to happen because we're not in a state or a place to focus on that. Yeah. So, you know, really prioritizing that for young people mm-hmm. to make the world a better place. Right. But yeah, how about you?
I mean, it's very much in line. You know, the projects that I'm working behind the scenes. Yeah. Access is number 1 right now. I feel like the biggest limitation right now is us. Like we're I'm one person, you're one person. So how can we help more people? So working on a more cost-effective strategy that can yield almost as good results as we have right now, right? I think our biggest testing ground right now is if we make it a little bit more accessible, if we create systems to make it more accessible, can we get the same results? Or can we at least get results that we're satisfied with? So access is a big element, especially because I've always been very, and one of the things I've loved about you, Kaylee, and you've kept me on track on this too, which is like marginalized communities, right? Communities that don't have access to anything, even like basic funds, places where governments have collapsed, where financial institutions don't even exist. So forget money. How do you get any sort of access? What can I do to help those people? So one of my biggest focuses right now is access, with obviously another element of marginalized communities. I would like to see Bye Bye Panic. Once we've been working on a few things, almost plug and play into different societies and in different countries, and that goes within their own language. That's one element. The other element is, how can I educate GPs, therapists, in a way that they can better serve their clients, their patients. I look at it as, if I could get to the person suffering before they start Googling and YouTube, if they can just get the help from the doctor right away, that'd be great. So we're looking at certifications there. And then, the third element is academia. Yeah. Like, can we show this to where academics accepts it and realizes that this is an incredibly powerful way to help people heal? I think with that, then I would want to focus on education. I would like this to be taught in schools early on, and even beyond that, applying it to things outside anxiety. I would like to see it in other chronic conditions like chronic pain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia.
Which we're seeing people now starting to recognize that as well too, which is awesome.
Yeah. There's so many other people. There's so many other like organizations that are pretty much saying the same methodology we are, but just different manifestations of symptoms. For some people, it's chronic pain. For some people, it's fibromyalgia. For some people, it's chronic fatigue. The dizziness thing that you and I were talking about, behind the scenes. So what can I do to help serve those communities? Because, I didn't really experience a lot of chronic fatigue or like chronic pain, but I know I can help people that are like me in the anxiety space, right? Like how I'm the, face of it. There's other people that are face of it. How can I be behind the scenes helping them create systems to help serve more people? That's where I see the future. I feel like it's really exciting. I feel like our work is cut out for us. And if it's been anything like the last 3 years, it's gonna be an amazing ride.
And I think too, like with all the experience that you have now, and we've, not only from your own journey, but now coaching thousands of people and seeing how it works with other people, you now have the systems. Yeah. Right? You have the best practices. And if we're able to streamline that at this point, that'll just make it so much easier for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
It's very cutting edge. And I think the biggest thing, if I ever had one advantage more than anything, was having people like you by my side. I think that was always probably my biggest advantage. I felt like you just believe the mission of Bye Bye Panic was so natural within you. And with Mirka, with, Caesar, with, everybody else on the team too, right? Nico.
It was awesome that besides me, the entire team are people that you coach.
Yeah.
And me too. Like I remember, I also remember Nico's first call.
Yeah, you taught Nico, right?
And Shiv.
Yeah, and Shiv. That's
like
right.
They were in there,
and
I
teachers,
remember.
right? Yeah.
Right. So, like to be honest, like I was telling you earlier today, was as we were having breakfast. I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the program and the mentorship in general, and you and your vision, all that you've done, is that you have that team, right? And everyone is so important in their own way. And I'm sure all of our clients can attest to it as well too, that everyone adds something, but it all comes together to make it really good for everyone. Like Marka, Shiv, Nico, Heather, Caesar, such amazing people.
It's been amazing. And it's like you guys have always been the most dependable people. And I'm telling, like, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people that try to replicate what we're doing, but I just don't think they can, because I don't know how you can create a team like this. And I was so lucky because I didn't even do it on purpose. I just didn't. Like, I felt like you guys chose me, and I was like, oh, thank you. Like, oh my God, like, you know, we're on the same vision. And you guys have been really taking the reins on a lot of things so that I could focus behind the scenes on a lot of important stuff. And it's ironically, it's never been the YouTube comments. It's never even been the success stories that really, like, you know, get to me. It's the fact that, like, the team is so supportive. That's the part where I feel like incredibly grateful. I'm happy with the success story. Of course I am. The people that say, you know, Shaan, you just changed my life, all these things, I take it. I don't take it too personally. I don't take the negative comments too personally either. But one thing that I've just always been like, oh my God, I'm so lucky, is you guys. And it's like, it kind of gets me a little teary eyed just like thinking about, like, the team has been so great. And there's no way I could have done this, like, without, like, there's no substitute for this. And I'm just forever grateful. So
us without you too, boss. So you are the
I paid
head
her to say that.
And
no, I'm joking.
Right. So, and then it was your vision. Like, you took it, you built it from the ground. And what's amazing about all of this is that you literally started off, like, in your room with the camera.
My parents' house. In a closet.
I didn't want to say your parents' house.
No, it's
I was
true.
avoiding it.
Parents' house in my closet. Just like I'd moved back home after I left my corporate. I just went full in. I think the only thing that was an advantage for me is I had the guts to do it.
Yeah.
I think that was what really helped. I just think I had the guts to do it. I think a lot of that had to do with anxiety, because I'm like, again, it kind of came to the same thing, which is like, I'm scared to do this because it's uncertain. But am I not going to do it because I'm not? Like, no, of course I'm going to do it. So I think I had the guts to do that, but I really think what made this special was you guys. I really do. I think you guys made it extremely special. And Bye Bye Panic is not me anymore. Like, I don't think it was never about me, but like, it's starting to shift so much more, which is about you guys. It's about the community. It's obviously about the members, but it's about, like, this vision, like this. And that's exactly how I wanted it to be, right? Because I'm like, you know, if I'm going to create something, I'd like it to outlive me to a degree. And
well, that's a part of the access piece, right? I think, as you said, like, one person, you can only do so much, right? You have to be able to, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but, like, delegate, I guess, or like pass it on. Just
you gotta pass it on,
so you can do that. So.
Yeah, and I realize you can give it, you can pass it on if people share your vision.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's the thing. Like, how do you find somebody who has the vision but also has the confidence?
But I think that attests to your coaching and to your program, because the fact that every single person besides me, which just happens to be by luck, has gone through your teaching, I think shows the power of what it is that you created. Right? That these people were able to not only learn off you, but then take that and now become coaches themselves. Yeah,
how many coaches have we gotten that are kind of like doing their own thing behind the scenes?
Well, right, we have our crew, and then we have people who are doing their own things, and we have so many people that that are coming up. Like, I'm thinking of one. Right? Who you know who you are. Who was amazing, but once again, just it's because it works. Right? It works. And you've made a beautiful thing that is just focused on helping people. right? And I think sometimes you get a lot of like hate, and we don't want to focus on that, but you know, anyone gets it. But I know, because I know you personally for the past 3 years, and I know because I'm in it, right? End of the day, like, we're all here, the entire team, and you especially, we're here because we want to help, right? We saw an issue, right? We struggled through it ourselves, and we have an answer, and now is how do we impart that?
Yeah.
And that's the success of it, because we're just doing that. So
yeah, it's been great. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.